Dr. Lauren Decicco, welcome to Podcastina.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Of course, thank you so much for being here. I was so excited when I came across your work. I'm a huge fan of trying to get the nervous system regulated, trying to get familiar with the nervous system. I think that it's not spoken about enough in the context of people's quality of life. So, if we could just start, would you mind explaining what it is that you do?
So, I am a doctor of physical therapy. That is my clinical background, but I approach the care that I give my clients, whether I'm working with them from the spectrum of healing from a chronic condition or illness, all the way up to the higher level of optimizing things like performance. I approach it through the nervous system because I believe that the nervous system is kind of the main controller of how we show up in the world, but also all the way down to a cellular level, how we are able to heal. Because if we're stuck in states of chronic survival, then we are just not going to be able to optimize at our fullest potential, but also we are not going to be able to fully heal. So I have kind of integrated into my work as a physical therapist ways to approach the nervous system to pull people out of survival states and into a state of safety so that they can go into their healing process and fully be able to their body can be in a safe enough place to accept the healing modalities that are being applied to the system. But then also when you're on the performance side of it, you're able to go in fully engaged and excited and present into the process of what you're trying to approach, as far as either a professional, an athlete, somebody that's just trying to take themselves to the next level. It still all has to do with the nervous system. So I have found ways to kind of reintegrate safety and help to rewire the nervous system so it stays more in its optimal state versus being in chronic states of fight or flight or functional freeze. Those kind of terminology just describe different states of survival.
I would imagine there's a ton of need in that. For someone that's not really familiar with this type of work or what these different states are, can you just talk to me about what the different states that our nervous system can be in are?
So there's a lot of terminology out there, and there's a lot of, I mean, this nervous system world has a lot of different facets to it and a lot of different approaches and mindsets and theories. But to be as general as possible, I think a lot of people are really familiar with fight or flight, and that's just being really more in an activated state, being literally prepared to fight or flee to preserve our safety and survival. And in that kind of state, that's what we would call more of the sympathetic state. And that is where you're going to have increased tissue tension, increased hypervigilance. You're going to be more sensitive to light and sound there. You're going to be more agitated. You're going to be more anxious there. And then as we progress into different states of the nervous system, that's typically our first activation level for survival responses. But a lot of people that have been in that state for chronic periods of time, they'll start flexing into what we call more of a freeze response, an immobilization, a shutdown, because we just can't tolerate being in those chronic states of activation for so long. So that's where anxiety and depression go together, right? You're super, super activated and then you kind of crash and you become more immobilized because your system needs to kind of recover from that and you're not allowing it. So it shuts itself down. So there you can have, people describe dissociation where you're kind of detached from your body. You have hard time becoming motivated. People describe it as being lazy, but really it's self-preservation. You still are going to have inappropriate levels of inflammation and immune responses in any of these states because the cells aren't functioning in a state of thriving. They're still functioning in a state of survival. So we have fight or flight, and then we have this kind of freeze response as well. And people will also say terminology like fawning is another survival response, but that's more of an adaptive behavioral response where we start to fawn to acclimate to our environment to keep ourselves safe there. So it's more of an adaptation versus just a actual physiological state of the nervous system. A really great theory that has great descriptors of understanding the states of survival is the polyvagal theory. So if people are looking for more information on going down the rabbit hole and exploring more, Dr. Stephen Porges and the polyvagal theory, and they created a lot of great knowledge and vocabulary to understand the different states, but also understand the role of the vagus nerve and how that can affect you and plays a role in how your body responds to the different input from your environment.
I'm so glad you made that distinction about the fawning because I've heard of that and I wondered what role that played in it. So essentially, freeze is actually legitimately one of like the three, and then fawning is just an adaptive behavior. I wanted to ask with that, do you think something like needing to, quote unquote, rot, like rot in bed, sit in front of the TV and just kind of dissociate. Is it safe to say that that's like a pretty common freeze response after someone's had like a particularly stressful day?
Right. So that's where you see descriptions like functional freeze. So you're still not operating out of an optimal state of your nervous system. You're just kind of like getting through your day, getting all of your basic functions done, your work, your chores, things like that, but then you go and you crash. And kind of it's a physiological forced recovery because you aren't allowing any sort of healthy recovery in your day-to-day schedule. So a lot of people on their weekends or in the evening, they will just bed rot and they don't get motivated to kind of like get out of bed and go and do something and socially engage because they've just been their system's been so overwhelmed when they're doing their regular activities. So I see that all the time. I've had people that are literally in such a functional freeze, immobilized state that maybe the only thing that they're getting up and doing for themselves is taking a shower every other day. And then they don't sleep well at night and then they bed rot all day. And it's just the cycle. So that description of behavior tells me that's more of a frozen, immobilized state. And so we actually kind of want to activate them a little bit to pull them out of that.
Yeah, when you shine a light on that, it also kind of makes me think that these stages are so involved in procrastination and fear of being seen. And when people think that they want to like take on a new project or put themselves out there, that these unintended consequences of being in a state of nervous system where you're frozen or you're in fear or you're in flight, that's pouring into these areas of our life that we're not even recognizing and preventing us from accomplishing things we want to accomplish.
Yeah, so that's a huge, and I think it shows up so subtly, especially in high performers that are used to getting so much done in their life, but start to feel stuck. Um, or if you're feeling like you're not motivated, and self sabotage is a big one of those. Like people will get labeled that they're self sabotagers and they don't want to get better and they don't want to heal. But really, their nervous system is trying to preserve a sense of safety because their nervous system is used to that state of what they're in. It's familiar. So, although it's not beneficial, it's familiar. So, it always wants to default to a familiar state versus putting yourself into what could be really exciting new endeavor, but it's not familiar to you. So then your nervous system tries to basically find ways to keep you in your more familiar state. So that's where self-sabotage, procrastination, um, making yourself small, quiet, those are actually just self-preservation behaviors to try to keep you in the familiar state versus pushing yourself forward.
Of course. And I love learning about this stuff because I think it kind of allows me to put a more empathetic lens on people that society deems as lazy or losers or whatever label you want. When to me, through just learning about these kinds of things, I now look at it more through a lens of this person's probably traumatized. This person's probably in some kind of survival mode reflex. And from having been in that myself, I think it's so important to have these conversations. So I wanted to talk about how, being in these stages of nervous system deregulation, how is that impacting overall health?
So if someone is in a chronic dysregulated state, then they are essentially not in this optimal portion of their nervous system, where they're, okay, so in an optimal portion of your nervous system, you're going to have lower tissue tension, lower inflammatory markers, better immune responses. But when you go into a state of survival, if you've ever noticed a shift in your own system, I don't know if you've ever noticed a stress response in yourself and you can kind of feel yourself clamp down and armor yourself. Think about that at a cellular level. So our body is so smart at protecting itself. It will literally start armoring all the way down at a cellular level. So you are going to also drive increased inflammation and pain receptors, and your immune system is going to be attached to this reflex as well. So that's where you start seeing this trickle down effect of autoimmune conditions, chronic inflammatory diseases, hormonal issues, because if you're driving stress hormones like cortisol, that has a cascade effect on your sex hormones, your thyroid hormone, your anti-aging hormones, your melatonin becomes affected by that as well. So then you start seeing issues in the sleep. So overall, collectively, you start seeing all of these symptoms showing up in people. So a lot of the people I work with are on more of the spectrum of dealing with chronic illness and chronic pain and chronic states of stress and survival, a lot of PTSD and trauma clients. And they might show up with one major complaint, but when I start asking them the checklist of all of these things together, they have everything. It's just they have a more prominent singular symptom or something like that. Maybe they're coming more for pain, but they also can't sleep through the night. They have hormonal complaints. They have gut issues and things like that. So no matter what, if your body is in that survival state, it is going to affect you all the way down to a cellular level.
Yeah, it's like our own little global ecosystem. You set off a nuclear bomb on the other side of the world, it's going to impact, you know,
Mm-hmm.
10,000 miles away. So, I also wanted to get into because I just saw a video where you were talking about how we mirror each other's nervous systems. So,
Mm-hmm.
let's start that with how does having a dysregulated nervous system affect how we show up socially?
So if you are dysregulated, so if you're in one of those states, fight, flight, or even a freeze response, you really don't have access to social engagement.
Mm,
And if you are going into a situation where you have to engage socially, you might notice it takes a lot of energy to do that because you're almost like forcing yourself into it. And when you look at the polyvagal theory, the vagus nerve plays a huge role in your ability to socialize and, have eye contact and be socially engaged and access joy and focus and flow and excitement. So when you are dysregulated, you don't even really have the desire to do that. But a lot of people are still forcing themselves to, which is probably even going to drive that dysregulation even further. But one thing to be said is if you're dysregulated and then you go into an environment socially where you're around people that are really, really safe, they are regulated and it's in a safe environment, that is actually going to shift your nervous system for you and it can help you regulate. So if you've ever noticed yourself in a stress response and then you go near someone that feels really safe, a person, an animal, and they're safe and calm, you might notice a shift in yourself becoming more safe and calm because your nervous system is talking to their nervous system. They're almost mirroring each other. So that is actually a recommendation I give a lot of my clients that have been chronically dysregulated. In the beginning, when I start trying to reset and rewire their nervous system, I say stay away from anything that you know is a stressor to your system, a person, place, activity, thing, environment, the best you can until you have better self-regulation. But really surround yourself with people and animals and environments that feel really good to you. They fill your bucket, they warm your soul, because that is going to start to shift your nervous system. That's called co-regulation, when people start matching their nervous systems together. A healthy co-regulation is with a safe person helping a dysregulated person, but an unhealthy one would be with two people that can't self-regulate And the more dysregulated person is kind of taking over the environment, and then we start shifting to that. So
What are some of the obvious behaviors that you witness that are kind of red flags for people to notice, hey, I'm supposed to be looking at this nervous system issue?
meaning how people are showing up to me they feel they're dysregulated, or how I'm determining for them that they're dysregulated, or what people should look for in themselves to decide maybe I'm
Yeah,
not
I
as
think both.
regulated as I.
Yeah, I think for people who maybe aren't as familiar with this kind of territory of catching the signs within themselves that there's a nervous system issue at play, whether that is socially or maybe both. Maybe we can talk about what are the social red flags that you're dysregulated and what are some of the physical red flags.
So, well, when I see people and they come into my office, and obviously I usually can tell on a phone call by what they're describing that they're struggling with, that they are chronically dysregulated. So, any of those physical symptoms, as far as having chronic pain, chronic inflammation, hormonal issues, gut issues, poor sleep habits, um, behaviorally speaking, and in like a day-to-day pattern and lifestyle, people have a really hard time starting new routines. They'll want to work out, but they can't get into the routine of it, or they stick to it for a couple of days and then they never go back to it. It's almost like that self-sabotage, wanting to do a big project or a goal but feeling stuck and feeling resistance with it. Every time you go to start it, you just can't do it. That would be a big indicator that you're coming from a place of some sort of dysregulation. um, fear walking into something, anxiousness, anxiety, going into an environment, and you can feel your whole system respond to it, like almost like a visceral reaction. You have tightening and bracing in your abdomen, you're holding your breath, you're clenching your jaw. Those are some physical responses to a stress response. And you want to look at that stress response. Sometimes that's appropriate for the input that you're receiving. So, say I was walking in the woods and a bear came up and I started responding like that, that would be appropriate. But I'm walking into the grocery store and I'm starting to respond like that. I'm like way above the level of input in my reaction and response. So, that's telling you something got hardwired in your nervous system, probably from a long-standing, childhood history, or something happened early on in your life or generationally that wired an inappropriate survival response to what the input is that's coming in. So, when you look at somebody, you can feel when when you get close to them and you look at their facial expressions and you feel their system close to yours. If you're somebody that's pretty sensitive yourself and aware, you can almost feel your body responding the same way and almost mirroring their body. So if they are maybe sad, for example, you can tell people are sad because they're hunched over, they're retracted away. You can almost feel it in your own body. If people are really agitated, you can feel that agitation as well. So you can start to feel, when you get near people, your own system starts taking on that stress response. And if you can't figure out why, it's usually because it's somebody else's, not yours. But for me, I go by postural cues. People that are having a hard time engaging with me, they're kind of slumped down, they can't make eye contact. I can tell they're more in an immobilized freeze response. They come in, they sit down in the chair, and they're like fidgeting around, they can't get comfortable, they're really like, you know a little bit, they're more activated, they're more in the sympathetic fight flight response. And people that have been in that chronically just pretty much fluctuate between those two responses. Rarely are they in that more optimal response. So sometimes they aren't fully aware of what that feels like because they've never been in that more centered optimal state. They can't even anchor to that feeling because
Mm.
haven't experienced it very much.
It just makes me sad for people that are, bumping up against that, just in understanding how many different aspects of your life that controls. I wanted to touch on, because I'm sure that there's people probably listening that don't know much about the vagus nerve, and we've touched on it a little bit. What is it and what role does it play in our bodies?
So the vagus nerve is a cranial nerve, meaning it comes directly from the brain into the body. It's not coming off the spinal cord. And there's different portions of it, but it basically comes through near the opening of your ear canal, down the front side of each side of your neck, behind your chest bone, and into your abdomen. And it innervates many, many things in the body, controls your blood pressure, your heart rate, your digestion. But when we go in and start to activate this nerve, it can help balance out your nervous system, because one of its biggest roles, it gives us direct access into that parasympathetic branch of the nervous system. So we have the sympathetic branch and the parasympathetic branch, and it's like a seesaw. So when we activate, we should be able to deactivate just as much as we activated, and come and become balanced out and back in that neutral zone, more in that optimal state. But over time, and for a lot of different varying reasons, it could be an anatomical reason, it could be the way that you developed when you were an infant, it could be chronic neck issues, it could be things like a lot of people that have like Ehlers-Danlos, for example, have some sort of associated vagus nerve dysfunction. There's a lot of different varying factors of why that nerve could become less active or less functional for you, which then we don't have that internal physiological response to balance us back out when we are getting activated. So therefore, when you do get activated and you never get balanced back out, you keep incrementally getting more activated, more activated, more activated, and getting stuck there. So one way to break this cycle is to go in and physically start to activate this nerve. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. And that's what I usually start with in my office, in my clinic, is I start activating the vagus nerve for people, and that brings them into that more balanced, central, optimal part of their nervous system, and they can start to feel what that actually feels like to be regulated versus dysregulated. They get a little taste of it, and then that starts to establish a baseline for them to notice when they're becoming dysregulated. But they're, in the polyvagal theory, they start to describe how the vagus nerve plays a role in our ability to socially engage and to be regulated, but then also all the way down to its connection to your immune and inflammatory reflexes and things like that, and how it can affect that and your gut issues. So vagus nerve stimulation is great for like gut issues and gut protocols as well.
Yeah, more on that, because I think, like, I understand that there is a nervous system and gut connection and that so much of your mental health is tied to the gut, but I don't know if that's like intuitively understood. People talk about, getting a gut feeling or getting a pit in their stomach when they're nervous. So I just wanted to maybe expand on what are the consequences of stress on our gut and on our digestive system in general.
Well, when you are in a chronic state of stress, you aren't going to turn on your normal digestion. If you think about what those different states were, like fight, flight. So if you're about to fight something or flee from something to escape danger, that's what your brain is thinking is happening when you're in that state. The last thing you're going to do is turn on your digestive system, right? So that's like low priority at that point. So if you're in that for long periods of time, then your digestion isn't going to activate and deactivate appropriately. So when you're ready to ingest food, a lot of people that I see are just eating because they know it's time to eat, not because they're getting any sort of signals of that they should be eating. They're doing that. And then a lot of them will describe the food just sits there. So like your gut motility, the way that the food starts to move through the intestines and colon, slows down and stops. And your absorption is shifted. Your acid that your body is producing in your stomach is not accurate to or prepared to bring food in and break it down. So you're not only having difficulty with food moving through your system, which is going to cause a lot of pain and discomfort, you're not breaking it down and absorbing it the way that you should either. So a lot of people, and then, your system starts to learn like, yeah, I ate, but I didn't really get the nutrition that I was supposed to get from that. So then you'll see a lot of people with weight fluctuations related to their chronic states of stress because their body doesn't know what to do or when it's going to be properly nourished. So it just kind of holds on to everything. And we also get, increased issues with like holding on to fluids as well with that.
So, what are some of the key solutions to look for with these gut issues? Do you start with, taking in the landscape of the person's stress levels, or what's kind of your go to diagnostic tools for being like, you have these gut issues? What's going on in your day to day?
So we a lot. So when I work with people, I want to know what their entire regimen looks like. I want to know everything from how much water do you drink to what does your nutrition look like. Not because I want to necessarily say, oh, well, instead of eating this, eat this. I want to know how that reflects the state of your nervous system. Because if we're, for example, always dysregulated, we're going to start eating a certain way, not having no desire to drink water, things like that. So running through an entire person's day or a person's entire day tells me a lot about the state that they're in and what kind of state they fluctuate through. It's almost always a survival state, but it might flex more on and off, but rarely is it a regulated survival state. And it's also going to tell me where can I help them start implementing some recovery and regulation of their nervous system so that they can start to break that cycle and start to integrate some safety into their system so then they can return to normal responses. So it could be little tiny changes in their schedule. It could be one of the things that I have people do is daily vagus nerve stimulation as a routine, but I also have people do that in the moment of when they can tell that they're being triggered into a stress response. So the more they practice their daily vagus nerve routine, which will bring them into a regulated state, the more that in tune they will become with the shift into a stress response. You see what I'm saying? So if they like start to build a baseline, then they become a little bit more intuitive to the subtle shifts out of that. And as soon as they can sense their body is going into a stress response, then they're going to start performing their vagus nerve stimulation or self-soothing, self-regulation techniques that I give them so that they can teach their system to regulate in the moments of stress and to recover from that stress response. And then what you'll see is the cascade effect will be shifts in their gut health, their the way that they want to eat their food and the nutrition that they take in, their water intake shifts. They'll become thirsty again. So they'll
Mm.
automatically start to have a thirst, reaction, or they'll have desire to eat because they'll actually feel the signals of I'm hungry right now. So all of that stuff will just kind of shift on its own as the nervous system comes out of survival and into regulation, because these are just normal physiological day-to-day automated behaviors of the nervous system. That's how we are built to turn on desire to eat and turn it off. At nighttime when the sun goes down, we are automatically supposed to understand, oh, I'm tired and I need to go to bed. But if you don't have the right chemical cascades because you've been chronically dysregulated, you don't get those automated signals anymore. So as soon as you shift into regulation, all of that stuff kind of starts to work itself out. And then we just kind of fix schedules and regimens with people, teaching the body when to release cortisol, for example, and then discharging extra stress that's being stored in the body. I do a lot of somatic work as well with people so that any stress and tension that they're holding in their body, they can start to discharge it and let it go as well. Because sometimes it's not always about calming down, but it's also about releasing some of that stored energy in the body.
Sure. And I hear a lot of demonization of cortisol. I don't know if it's appropriate to talk about it so negatively or if it really does serve some good functions in our body. I also have heard that drinking coffee on an empty stomach increases cortisol. Can you do some myth busting for me on that?
I can only tell you from the standpoint of being in survival. I'm not so much a supplement, nutrition, whatever. That's not my background. Um, I can tell you that if we are spiking our cortisol, so when we have input into our system that tells us we need to activate, we will dump adrenaline and cortisol because we're trying to activate to respond to this stressor. And if we're just on all the time, activated all the time, then we are just excessively dumping cortisol throughout the day instead of the one time a day when we're supposed to, which is usually morning, which wakes us and gets us up for the day. So we're supposed to have cortisol, and cortisol is not a bad thing when it's being released appropriately to and matching the level of input that's coming in. But when it's being released way too frequently throughout the day because we're having inappropriate responses to environmental stimulus, then we will start ending up in an with an issue of having way too much cortisol flowing through our system, which then again affects other hormones. But we can also end up with things like adrenal fatigue because of that, because that's what's, it's coming from your adrenals. So from a survival standpoint and a nervous system standpoint, if you can go in and start to reacclimate somebody to their environment so it's not always triggering these responses, you can start to shift some of these chemicals in the body as well. There's a lot of, supplements and nutrition and things like that that talk about shifting cortisol and decreasing cortisol and whatever, and that might work. I have no idea, but again, I believe you have to do this part too for whatever your nutrition that you're putting in your body to really, really take effect. So if you take the cortisol pills or whatever it is that the person prescribes you and recommends to you find off TikTok and whatever that promises you all of this stuff, but you don't address the reason why your body keeps dumping cortisol, then you're going to keep going back into that response once you stop those supplements. So really just want to reset your system. Really, it's really about feeling safe in your body. And a lot of that stuff, those inappropriate chemical responses start turning off.
That's huge. I so appreciate the clarification on that, that we do need cortisol in some instances, that it does have its functionalities. It's just becoming problematic when it's too much or being dispersed at inappropriate
Mm-hmm.
times. So I'm glad that we cleared the air on that. I hear so much talk about it, and especially a woman's relationship with like hormones and cortisol and how it impacts us. So that's just an area I've been curious about.
Yeah, and I think there's I think if you look up like Andrew Huberman's podcast, he has some really good data that he breaks down regarding cortisol, and he kind of summarizes like where it's appropriate to be releasing throughout the day. So if you're somebody that wants to learn a little bit more about that, I think he breaks it down in a way that's a little bit more digestible for like the average person who doesn't have a science background but keeps hearing all these keywords. Like all of this stuff is so trending, right? Like it's great that we're becoming aware of it, but you kind of have to understand the root of why this is happening, and that it's not all that these things are bad, it's just how it's being released in your body chronically that's becoming an issue for people. And I think when all of this stuff is being thrown around without people really understanding what it is, what I see coming into my office with people that are dealing with some really complex issues and they aren't getting better with just, like their primary care or something, they just throw everything at it.
Hmm.
They're scrolling and they're just trying to find answers. And like that, that's not feeling good, they just want to feel better. but all of this information that's out there, and it's a lot of it's really not, it's not that it's not accurate, it's just not necessarily appropriate for every single person. So that's why working with a professional is really important if you've been dealing with stuff for a really long time, because it's the application of the stuff that's what's going to work for you or not work for you. People go out there and they buy every single supplement and they do every single biohacking device and whatever, and they're throwing so much money into it, and all they're doing is driving their stress response,
Yep.
because it's just really adding more stress to their plate instead of alleviating the stress, and they don't know why it's not working for them.
Yeah, and I can see how that would then have the opposite impact of actually adding to your stress because you're like, "Well, I've spent $2,000 on red light and this and that and this supplement and cold showers and hot saunas and whatever. None of it's
Yeah,
working." It's like that is more stressful to be doing. You don't even know you're doing the wrong things. The intention is good, but the stress goes up
right.
from doing it all and none of it working.
Well, and I use a lot of those things, but if I had started using that in the beginning of my healing process, I would have driven my inflammation and my stress response into a further hole, because I didn't have the internal capacity to handle that new load. Even though it's supposed to be like a healthy load onto my system, I just wouldn't have had the physiological resources internally to help balance myself and acclimate to these new things that I'm putting into my system. So I use red light. I think cold immersion is like really, really fantastic, but used appropriately in the right phase of your healing process. That stuff is great for optimizing, not necessarily for the initial stages of healing. So I do think having some level of awareness of when you use these different modalities is super important to not make your symptoms worse and to actually turn on the healing process with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to talk about how are some of the ways that I can signal safety to my body when it's freaking out for no reason.
So we talked about a couple. One of those is feeling safe in your environment. So knowing what environments feel really good. So building a list of resources for yourself. If you don't have the internal resources, meaning your body has lost its physiological ability to balance you out in regards to, being activated and stressed, it should balance itself out. So sounds like most people have an issue where they don't have great internal physiological resources to de-stress automatically. So we have to start using these external resources to feel safe in our body. So the vagus nerve stimulation is huge, because the vagus nerve starts to activate a signal of safety and that parasympathetic response in the system to flex you out of that survival mode. Doing co-regulation with safe person or animal and being in a safe space. And then one thing that I really, really like for people is using vibration. So have almost every single one of my clients get a ball that vibrates and start holding it on themselves. I mean, breathing is a huge, huge part of calming yourself down and bringing yourself back into the present moment. But sometimes when you're super, super stressed, it's really hard to run through your brain and be like, oh my gosh, I should be breathing right now. Sometimes you have to like give yourself a sensation of calmness, and then people will start to breathe. So I try to give people tools that they don't have to do a lot of thinking. They just put it on them and have access to it. So I have people use vibration balls, and they use it on the path of like their vagus nerve along, the lower part of their neck, on their chest, and in their abdomen, to start to feel more soothing sensations in their body. And I just teach people different ways to integrate these self-regulation tools. You see a lot of parents that have children that are easily dysregulated, and they start having meltdowns and freakouts. And obviously they don't have the capacity to self-regulate yet. They learn that from their parent. Usually a lot of parents start getting dysregulated because their kids are
Hmm.
losing it. So one tool is like teach the parent to self-regulate. That's one thing, because then the kid has to basically co-regulate with them. But another tool is like give them the vibration. The kids, they intuitively take this ball and they just put it on them and they just sit with it
Mm.
and they immediately start calming down. So giving actual sensations that disrupt that fear response, that survival response, and feel safe on your system is usually what I have people do.
Besides the breath work, because I think breath work and meditation, and obviously those are valuable tools that should be in everybody's toolkit, but I think those are the ones that people hear about really commonly. So, besides vibration, is there one that you're like, oh my God, I can't believe people don't know about this? This is such a good, easy, handy tool.
So I think rhythmic rocking
Mm.
is like a very soothing tool. And, meditation and breath work, again, are tools that are fantastic. But if you are coming from a place of, say, you have significant history of trauma, those techniques are actually really activating. They can be really, really triggering for people. Being a person that has suffered from any sort of trauma, especially complex PTSD, sitting quietly with yourself is one of the most terrifying things you can do. So I rarely start people in the realm of meditation and breath work. I believe in it and I practice it all the time, but only from a place of having had rebuilt my physiological resources first and done a lot of trauma work and discharge a lot of that from my system to then be able to sit quietly with myself. So again, it depends on the person, but that's usually like on the end of the spectrum of the phases that I take people through to heal their nervous system. The end goal would be like breath work, meditation, cold immersion, if that's something they can tolerate, intense exercise. Those things actually start to expand your capacity and tolerance to stressors. Whereas the early stages are more starting to just establish safety in the system and then start to hardwire that as like the foundational state that we're in and maintain that. So somatic movements, that would be rhythmic rocking, that can be really, really soothing to the system and so easy to do. You can do it sitting, you can do it laying down, and it's literally just typically like you could just rock your knees, you can rock in place, but it mimics being a baby being soothed. So it's easy to do. You can do it anywhere and it feels safe.
I immediately thought of the soothing a baby by rocking, and that's probably some kind of programming that we all have from being soothed that way as infants.
Well, a lot of our capacity to self-regulate comes from our early years of development and having a caregiver that was present and soothing. But that wasn't always the case, especially there's like that era of cry it out with babies
Mhm.
who they needed the soothing because they don't have their own ability to do it. They needed their caregiver to pick them up and soothe them. But we were, some era of parenting was like very detached. So a lot of those babies didn't necessarily integrate a lot of self-regulation or learn regulation early on and may have grown up to end up having difficulty regulating and dealt with chronic dysregulation. Just simply from that can be the groundwork for that.
I'm assuming you've probably read The Body Keeps the Score. It feels very in
Mm-hmm.
line with this kind of work. Is there
Mm-hmm.
a lot of weight to being attuned to what's going on with our hips? Should we be doing hip stretching? Because he talks about it a lot in that book, that a lot of issues are stored in the tightness of the hip flexors.
Yeah, the psoas is the muscle, the deep flexor muscle that stores a lot of emotion. And a lot of that is related to the fact that it's so anatomically close to your adrenals. So we talked
Mm.
earlier about how when we perceive a stress or a threat to our system. We activate our system by dumping cortisol and adrenaline, and then it literally turns on our first responders to that fight flight response, which would be your psoas muscle, and then a lot of time in jaw clenching. So our muscles that are hardwired to be first responders to survival is our psoas muscle and some of our abdominal muscles and our around our jaw. So if you are perpetually dealing with being stuck in survival, maybe you had one huge trauma in your life that set this cycle off and you've never really come out of it because it just keeps playing over and over and over in your mind. Your body continuously dumps those chemicals and those hormones and keeps your psoas turned on. And it's kind of a two-way street. When the psoas stays stuck on and tight and tense, it will keep, giving some sort of input to the adrenals. So going in and starting to release the psoas can start to break that cycle as well. And that's where I think like there's hip stretches you can do, somatic work, or, like I do the rhythmic rocking type stuff into your lower body starts to release the psoas as well. But no matter what, you really do need to, that's one way to discharge that energy from your body. But part of the process is also understanding what wired this survival response in your system to begin with, you know. But we don't always have to know the story, but I think understanding it and processing it and working through it and seeing how it keeps showing up in your present day is really important to the rewiring process.
Yeah, I'm sure the releasing aspect is probably a key in, like, I wanted to talk about what kinds of things should people be integrating to get out of something that's more chronic. Like burnout, I know is like a chronic thing that a lot of people are experiencing these days, or just chronic states of stress. Like, what small changes should people implement, or do they need like a huge overhaul to get over something as serious as burnout?
Not really an overhaul because you can really make some subtle changes to start to build in recovery. It's really about having the ability to flex up and down within your nervous system, to be more flexible and resilient, not to just be like cool, calm, and collected all the time. But when I flex on and activate myself to be safe, for example, like you see burnout, obviously, and people that are on the go, high performers, doers, pushers all the time, they never allow themselves to balance back out. So, really, just implementing portions of their day that they are consciously pulling themselves out of activation and deactivating to rebuild that flexibility in their system. And in the beginning, it would be, you know, a routine that they would start to integrate and implement, but their body will start to realize it needs to do it itself. But they've seen with the vagus nerve, if you go long periods of time without flexing out of stress responses and activating your vagus nerve by driving parasympathetic, either through, just pausing and breathing, or sitting quietly and calming down after something that, made you really tense, it will stop doing that response. So just continuously activating that will really help as well. So, but for people that are on the go all the time, I really just have them start to integrate even like a 2 minute. It doesn't have to be a 20-minute rest break. It can be a 2-minute rest break where you are just actively driving that parasympathetic response to teach your system to flex up and down again, and that you catch yourself when you're going and not stopping, you are going to teeter right over the edge into burnout. So really
Mhm.
catching it before it even gets there so that we avoid burnout altogether. But once you get to burnout, you have to respect that. Once you go into shutdown burnout, do not force yourself out of it. You actually have to respect that and allow yourself the recovery because it's demanding it at that point. And if you keep pushing past burnout, then you're going to have some really, really serious consequences. But usually burnout happens because the body is just going to force you to shut down because you didn't listen to it.
Oh my gosh.
Um,
That's so valuable and counterintuitive, I think, for the types of people that do experience it, right? Because it's the overachievers, the type A people that get themselves to burnout and then have at least. I should just speak to my own experience. When I get to burnout, I kind of just guilt trip myself. I'm like, no, I should be able to push through and do more. And, the David Goggins of it all, trying to push myself past it. But you're saying there's damaging implications to doing that.
well, you're going to make it last longer.
Okay.
You will actually come out of your burnout a lot faster if you respect it and give yourself the rest. So say you have a day where you can tell you've burned yourself out. How would you generally approach that kind of day?
I end up rotting, which then I guess is a freeze response.
Right. So burnout is shut down.
Mhm.
So that is the state. You're literally in that immobilized freeze state of your nervous system. It's excessive amounts of parasympathetic. So do you stay in that until it passes, or do you you're like, okay, I've had enough of this and I'm gonna get back at it?
Yeah, I've unfortunately been guilty of both, and the part that's bad here is the part where I force myself through it, where I go, "No, just have another cup of coffee or a yerba mate or whatever," and I will try to force caffeine on top of it or go for well, I guess the going for a walk is really good, but that'll
Mhm.
energize me and get me past whatever kind of state of freeze that I'm in so that I can keep being productive.
Yeah, so I usually think that people should, if they've pushed themselves to the point of some sort of shutdown, respect that to the point where if you feel like you need to rest, rest, but be gentle with yourself. Don't beat yourself up about it. Don't guilt yourself. Take your day slow and steady. Gentle movement is good. It will actually pull you out of it. So going for a walk is great. Doing gentle stretches. Don't go do a high intensity workout just to get yourself moving. That would drive the burnout more.
Mm.
But it's not say necessarily just stay in bed and rot, but it's be really gentle with yourself and respect what your body is telling you. Your body is telling you you did too much, and you need to say, yeah, okay, like I did too much here, and now I'm going to be super kind to myself, and you will actually move out of that a lot faster.
How do you teach yourself to respect and honor it without feeling lazy or guilting yourself as I do?
Well, would you ever do that to somebody else?
Mm. Yeah, I wouldn't want
That's
to.
one thing. But your thought process, the story you believe about your behavior in response to how you're feeling is something that was a hardwired core belief for you for whatever reason. Because other people might not feel that way about needing to take a day off, So
Mhm.
something in your particular history has led you to believe that you have to push and do or whatever, and that it's not necessarily okay to be doing nothing, even though doing nothing in that particular situation is actually doing something for yourself.
Mhm.
So it's definitely a mind reframe. So your hardwired physical practices and what mobilizes you and immobilizes you all have to do with whatever your core belief system is that's wired into you from a young age, what you learned young that kept you safe. And safety could look like approval, validation, worth, things like that. It's not necessarily safe in a sense like literally physically kept you safe, but in some instances it is. But a lot of it is just like who in your environment, in your system, in your either your culture, your family, your neighborhood, your upbringing, whatever, had to behave a certain way to match, and stay safe in that environment.
Yeah,
So if you
absolutely.
know that your decision making of how you show up for the day is related to a survival response, you want to explore that stuff. So the first part of it is learning how to self-regulate and regulate your nervous system. But then when you can do that, then you can really start to go into the exploration of what hardwired that to begin with.
I love
And
that.
recognizing it. Am I showing up right now in a place coming from fear, or is this authentically aligned with what I know is what I want to do for myself today? And anything that's coming from a place of fear, you could explore it. I highly recommend that if you want to do the deep work. But you can also learn to rewire that by continuing to do the thing despite the fear, but self-soothing while you do it. Create a sensation of safety to push through whatever that fear response is that's trying to stop you from doing it. To teach your system, this is not history, this is present, and I'm safe right now.
It feels so good to hear that. I've always kind of looked back and thought, okay, well, I come from, and many people do, this kind of, they call it, generational trauma or whatever, where everyone was in survival mode in my family for such a long time. We're from the former USSR. Like, I was born in Ukraine. My family knows nothing but trauma and generational trauma and being in survival mode. And I think when I started clocking that and understanding that they just saw relaxing and, quote unquote, doing nothing as like a threat to safety, it truly
Mm-hmm.
was that. And now as an adult and in retrospect, it's so hard to like deconstruct those things. But I really love this notion of just changing the mental framework around, oh, me relaxing and me doing nothing is still me doing something.
Mm-hmm. So this is just one instance where you actually can attach to the fact that it's triggering a fear survival response to relax, right?
Hmm.
So that's a perfect opportunity for you to apply some self regulation while you continue to relax, to teach yourself it's actually okay to relax. So that would be exactly what I would teach like a client. Like if you know what, you start to get in tune with your actual specific triggers, then you can start to apply safety during those responses so that you can reteach yourself that currently I'm actually safe right now. I mean, for generations, your family wasn't safe to just sit and relax, but currently, right now in this present moment, you are, and it's okay, and you actually need this, but your body might not feel that way. Your body's telling you a story like, wait, no, 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 like this, we shouldn't be doing this. We need to be getting up. We need to be doing something. It doesn't feel right. So it wants to default to what's been familiar for your family lineage forever. So you need to actually give yourself a felt sensation of safety and soothing as you start to continue to do the new activity that your system and your history isn't used to. So that would be the perfect time to apply that, to start to reintegrate and rewire a new pathway and pattern into your specific generation. But then moving forward, you're now breaking generational trauma moving forward as well because of that.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Lauren Decicco, thank you so much for coming on today. If people want to learn more about what you're doing, where should they go?
So I love to connect with people on my social media, on TikTok and Instagram. It is Dr. Decicco DPT. And then I do have a website. It's optimize-movement.com. You can also go on that website. I do have some free information, a guide to basically explaining the nervous system and how it affects your healing process and your performance, and some daily practices that you can get from that as well off of my website. But I do virtual consultation and coaching and programming for people. And then I also do in person sessions as well. And hopefully starting some group work in the future.
That's so exciting. I will plug all of that stuff in the show notes. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Bye.